Hello everyone. Welcome to Dead Time Stories. I know many of you enjoy listening to these videos as you fall asleep. So before you drift off, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from. And if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Alright, now let's get comfortable, relax, and dive into tonight's story. Marla had driven nearly 7 hours to reach the house. Her phone lost signal 2 hours back, and by the time the gravel drive crunched beneath her tires, the sun was melting into the horizon. Long shadows stretched across the overgrown lawn, and the farmhouse stood at the center like a tombstone in tall grass, leaning slightly, slumped, watching. The realtor had been clear, no neighbors for miles. That was the selling point, wasn't it? Isolation. A chance to start over. No city noise. No memories trailing her like ghosts. She stepped out of the car, the air damp with the musk of rain-soaked soil and wood rot. The house smelled like wet earth, old fires, and something else, something faintly sweet and sour, like decaying apples in an attic. She wrinkled her nose. Inside, it was cooler than she expected. The walls were wood-paneled and yellowed with age. A fireplace dominated the living room, and the furniture, left behind by the previous owners, was covered in white sheets that moved slightly in the breeze, even though the windows were shut. She pulled the sheets away, one by one. Dust swirled in the dying light. The couch creaked. The armchair sagged. Her voice echoed thinly as she muttered, "Home sweet home." Upstairs, 2 bedrooms waited like open mouths. She chose the smaller one with the least broken floorboards. That night she slept with her coat still on, curled under a quilt that smelled faintly of cedar and something older. At 3:12 a.m., she woke up to a sound. Scratch, scratch. It was slow, deliberate, coming from the wall near the fireplace downstairs. Marla held her breath. The sound stopped. Then it started again, closer. Marla sat upright, heart punching at her ribs. The sound was faint, almost shy, like something testing the edges of the wall, unsure whether to emerge. Scratch, scratch, pause. She pushed the quilt back and swung her legs over the bed. The floorboards were cold beneath her socks. With each cautious step, she moved toward the stairs, trying not to breathe too loudly. The house was still, too still. At the base of the stairs, she paused. The fire had gone out hours ago, leaving the living room in shadow, the dying coals in the hearth like watching eyes. The scratching stopped again. Marla stepped onto the old rug and crossed the room. The sound hadn't come from the chimney. No, it was in the wall. The far wall. The one next to the grandfather clock that no longer ticked. She crouched and placed her ear against the wood paneling. Nothing. Then, scratch, scratch, tap, tap. She jerked back. Jesus! It wasn't mice. Not even rats. She'd heard those before in her apartment downtown. This was different. This sound had intention. It wasn't scurrying, it was feeling, like fingers tracing lines. She stood, backing slowly away from the wall. Then something else, barely audible, just at the edge of hearing. A whisper. One word. Mamrelea. She froze. No, she didn't hear that. Couldn't have. Sleep deprivation. Long drive. Emotional fatigue. Her mind playing tricks. The room remained silent now, except for the soft groan of the house settling. She laughed nervously. Okay. Yeah. You're fine. This is fine. Trying to convince herself, she turned toward the fireplace to stack a few logs and relight the fire. But something new caught her eye. A small, dark stain on the floor near the far wall. Circular. Damp. She crouched again. It was tacky to the touch. She lifted her fingers, then recoiled. Red. Fresh. Not dust. Not water. Blood. And before she could decide what to do, the grandfather clock behind her, dead for years, let out a low, dragging chime. Just one note. Bomb. And the whisper returned, closer now. Back. Marla didn't remember standing. One moment, she was crouched by the blood-dark stain. The next, she was stumbling backward, breath shallow, arms crossed tightly over her chest like she could fold herself into invisibility. The whisper was gone. So was the scratching. But the clock still loomed behind her, as if daring her to look. Its single hand hadn't moved in years. The glass was cracked. No mechanism ticked inside. It shouldn't have made a sound, couldn't have. And yet it had chimed. Just once. As if to mark her. A gust of wind howled down the chimney then, stirring the cold ashes in the hearth. Thwum. The fire suddenly flared, briefly, like breath catching in a throat, then died back to a soft orange glow. And something tumbled from the chimney. It hit the brick hearth with a quiet thud, rolled slightly, and came to rest at her feet. It was small, wrapped in what looked like aged linen or scorched muslin, bound with twine stained with soot. Marla stared. Nope. No way. But she didn't move. Against all better judgment, against the voice in her head screaming to get out, she knelt beside the bundle and touched the cloth. It was warm. Too warm. And damp with what felt like ash mixed with something thicker. She unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a doll, handmade, grotesque in its simplicity. Stuffed with straw. Its head was too large for its body, and one button eye had been torn off. The fabric of its mouth had been sewn shut with what looked like human hair. A smell rose from it, wood smoke, mildew, and something bitter and metallic. But it was the stitching on the chest that froze her blood. In crooked, childlike threadwork, spelled out in dark red, were the words, "Welcome back." Marla let the doll fall from her hands, and it landed on the floor with a soft plop. The room didn't move. The shadows didn't shift. But something had changed. The house had exhaled. She backed away, whispering to herself, "Okay. Okay. No one said anything about this." She made it halfway to the kitchen before the light above the stove flickered on, by itself. And in the moment of that brief flicker, she saw it. A figure. Small. Watching her from the hall. Not moving. Just standing. Then the light flickered off. And she was alone again. Marla didn't scream. She couldn't. The breath lodged in her throat like a stone, heavy and unmoving. She blinked into the dark hallway. The image of the figure seared into her mind. Small. Pale. Unmoving. Its eyes, not glowing, not angry, just wide, as if surprised to be seen. She stayed frozen by the fireplace, waiting for the figure to reappear. Nothing. She reached for the old lamp on the end table and yanked the chain. Light bloomed weakly into the room, pushing back the dark, but the hallway remained shadowed, just beyond its reach. Like the house was choosing what she could and couldn't see. "I'm not doing this," she whispered. "Nope. Not losing it. Not again." She grabbed her phone from the kitchen counter. No signal. Of course. She tapped on the screen, hoping for bars that wouldn't come. One bar flickered for half a second, then vanished. She opened the camera app and crept back to the hallway, holding it up like a shield, recording as she peeked around the corner. Nothing. Empty. Just a long hallway, lined with framed photos left by the last family. Sepia-toned images of people who looked far too serious, standing beside barns and wagons and stone-faced children. One photo had been turned upside down. Marla stepped closer. It was a portrait of a man in a dark suit. Tall. Gaunt. Eyes sunken. His lips were drawn too tight, his ears oddly long, and his hands, visible beneath the edge of the frame, were too big for his wrists, like they'd been added from someone else. She straightened the frame with a shiver. It stayed crooked. She tried again. It tilted again. She reached to pull it off the wall completely, but stopped, because in the glass reflection, she saw him. Behind her. A tall man in the mirror. Dark suit. Hollow eyes. She spun. No one was there. The hallway was empty. The kitchen behind her was still. Even the doll had vanished from the hearth. But the mirror on the photo? It still held his reflection. And now, he was smiling. Marla backed away from the hallway, her eyes locked on the photograph. The smile in the mirror was narrow and toothless, almost polite, like a host welcoming her to a place she wasn't supposed to be. Then the glass in the frame cracked. Not shattered. Cracked. Right down the center. She turned and bolted into the living room, grabbing her coat, keys, anything she could reach. Her hands trembled as she yanked open the front door, letting the cold air slap her in the face like a wake-up call. But the fog had returned. Dense. Heavy. So thick she couldn't see the porch steps below her. She took one step forward. The fog swallowed her foot. And from somewhere close, but not visible, she heard the sound of breathing. Low. Raspy. Wet. Just beyond the edge of sight. Marla slammed the door and turned all the locks. Then she leaned against the doorframe and slid to the floor, her breath shaking out of her in bursts. "I should have never come here," she muttered. "Stupid. I knew better. I knew better." The floor beneath her gave a soft creak. She paused. The creak came again, but not from her weight. From beneath the floorboards. It wasn't a creak anymore. It was a knock. 3 sharp, deliberate knocks from under the floor, directly beneath her. Knock. 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 Her spine straightened, and she stood slowly, backing away from the door. The knocks came again, slower this time. Heavier. Knock. Pause. Knock. Longer pause. Then, knock. The final hit was so loud the floor shuddered. Dust spilled from the ceiling above, and the photograph in the hallway fell, shattering completely this time. And then, silence. Until she heard the voice again. This time, from the baseboards close to her ankle. A low murmur, like someone pressing their mouth to a hole in the wood. "You remember, don't you?" Marla froze. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed into the armchair, breathing hard, trying not to cry. The whisper came again, softer now, coiling around her like smoke. "You promised you'd never come back." Morning didn't come the way it was supposed to. There was no sunlight streaming in, no warm golden slant across the floorboards. Just a dim gray glow, like the sky had forgotten how to rise. Marla hadn't slept. Her eyes were dry and red, her muscles aching from staying tense all night. She'd sat in the armchair with a fireplace poker across her lap, a useless weapon, but comforting to hold. Nothing more had knocked. No voices whispered. But she couldn't shake the feeling that the house was waiting. She moved cautiously, tiptoeing through the kitchen, trying to act like someone who belonged there. She made tea out of habit, even though the kettle whistled far too loud in the silence. That's when she noticed the trapdoor. It was almost hidden, tucked in the far corner of the kitchen, under a frayed rug she hadn't lifted before. Just a faint seam in the wood, and an old iron ring, rusted into place. She stared at it, fingers twitching. The ring was cold when she pulled it. It took effort. Whatever was underneath hadn't been opened in a long, long time. When the latch gave, it snapped with a sound like cracking bone. The door groaned open, revealing narrow wooden stairs that descended into blackness. She should have left it alone. But something compelled her, an ache in her gut, a pull in her chest. Like gravity, but deeper. The cellar air rose up like breath, damp, old, metallic. It smelled of rust and mildew, and something underneath both, like the inside of a locked box, or a sealed grave. She flicked on the flashlight from her phone. The beam trembled in her hand as she took the first step. Each board creaked under her weight, announcing her descent into whatever the house had hidden. The cellar wasn't large, just a single room of packed dirt walls and wooden shelves, stacked with jars of preserves gone black, and dusty tools too old to be useful. But at the far end was a door. Steel. Heavy. No handle. No hinges. Just bolted shut with iron brackets and a long vertical slit at eye level. Marla approached it slowly. Inside, something moved. Just the faintest shuffle. Like someone turning over in bed. And a voice. This time clear. Young. Familiar. "Marla?" Marla's stomach clenched so tight she thought she might collapse. That voice, fragile, wavering, was unmistakably a child's. But more than that, it was known. Not just familiar, it was buried. Deep in the back of her memory, sealed under years of dust. She hadn't heard that voice in nearly 2 decades. "Lena?" she whispered. Silence. Then, softly, from behind the steel door. "You remember me?" Marla's flashlight flickered. Her breath caught in her throat as the light dimmed, then steadied. The voice came again, stronger now. "You left me here." "No," Marla breathed, backing a step away. "That's not possible. Lena's gone." "You left me here," the voice repeated. "We promised to stay together." She stared at the eye slit. There was no light on the other side. Just blackness. "You said we'd always play in the woods, and we'd never be scared. You said you'd never leave me, even if the dark came. But you left. And now I live in the walls." A sound broke the silence then, a gentle, rhythmic thump. Like a small fist knocking on the metal from the other side. Thump, thump, thump. Marla stepped closer, against her better judgment, pressing her ear to the cold steel. She remembered that summer. The year she turned 10. The family vacation to the country house. Her sister, Lena, 6 years old, barefoot, wild-haired. The woods. The dare. And the day Lena disappeared. No one ever found her. Everyone assumed she wandered off. A storm came through. They searched for days. Weeks. But Marla had always remembered one thing. The last place she saw her sister was near a root cellar at the edge of the property. One just like this. The door hadn't been there before. This couldn't be the same house. Could it? "You're not real," Marla whispered, pressing her hand against the cold metal. "This is some kind of sick." "I missed you," the voice said. "But I had friends. In the walls. They talk to me now." Thump. "Do you want to meet them?" Thump. "They're hungry." The knocking grew louder. And then, without warning, something scratched the inside of the door. Not a fist. Not a knock. Claws. Marla stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a crooked floorboard as the scratching inside the door turned erratic, fast, desperate, like something trying to tear its way through. Her flashlight trembled in her hand, the beam darting across the earthen walls. She stared at the steel slab, heart pounding. "Lena?" she whispered again, hating the weakness in her voice. But the voice was gone. Only the scratching remained, shifting now to a more deliberate pattern, rising, then pausing, then scratching in 3 short bursts. Scratch. 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 The rhythm struck something in her memory. A nursery rhyme? A game? She didn't know. She just knew that whatever was behind the door wasn't her sister, not anymore. Marla turned and ran. She bolted up the cellar stairs, each creaking board a jolt beneath her feet. She slammed the trapdoor shut, yanking the rug back into place like it could erase the whole thing. Then she sank to the floor, panting, hands shaking, staring at the spot as if it might rise up on its own. "Okay," she muttered. "Okay. It's the house. It's messing with me." She stood and walked to the sink, splashing cold water on her face. Her reflection in the cracked kitchen window looked pale, haunted. Her eyes, once dark brown, seemed lighter now. Almost gray. She blinked. They returned to normal. Outside, the fog still clung to the woods like wet cloth, suffocating the landscape. And that's when she noticed something. Roots. From the corner of the house, where the kitchen met the porch, thick black roots were snaking up the siding. Not vines, roots. Twisted and gnarled, like they had forced their way out of the soil. They moved, slowly, but visibly, curling toward the window like fingers stretching in sleep. "What the hell?" She backed away. A low groan echoed from beneath the floor. Then a knock. Not the sharp thud of wood on wood. This was a wet knock, like something meaty striking the floorboards. Thud. Followed by a whisper. "They're waking up now." Marla turned toward the hallway. The doll was back. Sitting upright at the base of the stairs, where she hadn't left it. Its head was tilted toward her, and its mouth had come unstitched. The doll didn't blink, didn't move, but Marla couldn't take her eyes off it. Its straw-stuffed arms had been lifted somehow, just enough to make it look like it was reaching for her. The frayed thread that had once sealed its mouth lay in a curled black line on the floor. She inched toward it, heart thudding. Her phone trembled in her hand, but she kept the flashlight pointed steady. When she was close enough, she crouched and whispered, "Who put you back here?" No answer. She reached out. The doll tipped forward, face down, without being touched. From somewhere upstairs, a faint creak sounded, like someone shifting their weight above her. Marla froze. She had only been using the downstairs. She hadn't even opened the second bedroom. Very slowly, she stood and stepped toward the stairs. The air on the second floor was colder, as if the whole level was cut off from warmth, left to spoil and rot in stillness. The hallway smelled faintly of lavender and mold. Old wallpaper peeled like sunburned skin from the walls. She passed her own room, then stopped at the end of the hall where a narrow door waited, one she hadn't opened. She was sure she hadn't seen it before. She reached for the knob. It turned easily. The hinges moaned as the door opened inward. Inside was a small room, no larger than a closet, with slanted ceilings and a single, boarded-up window. Dust blanketed the floor like ash. Children's drawings were tacked to the walls. Crayon stick figures holding hands. One showed a little girl with brown hair, Lena. The other, her. In every drawing, they stood beside the house. And behind it, scribbled in thick black crayon, was a third figure. Taller. All black. Featureless. Each drawing had the same title written in childish handwriting, "The Tall Man Watches." Marla felt her throat go dry. Then, from behind her, the door creaked, closing. She turned just as it slammed shut. In the dark, something whispered close to her ear. "He doesn't like when you open old rooms." Marla lunged for the door, heart battering her chest. She twisted the knob, it wouldn't budge. Locked from the outside. The air in the room grew colder, wet with the smell of rot and something older. Something that had waited. She turned slowly, back pressed against the wall. The drawings rustled softly on the walls, though no breeze moved. Her flashlight flickered, once, then again, sputtering like a dying breath. The beam fell on the center of the far wall, where one drawing hung slightly crooked. She stepped forward and lifted it. Behind it, carved directly into the wood, were words gouged deep and rough. "He sees through the wood." Her breath caught. She reached out to trace the letters, but stopped, because beneath her fingers, the wall was warm. The grain pulsed ever so slightly, like skin over muscle. And as she leaned in, the wood moved. Just an inch. Just enough to breathe. The flashlight went out. Total darkness. She fumbled for her phone, smacking the side of it, shaking it, whispering, "Come on, come on!" Then something moved behind her. Not a scuttle. Not a creak. A slow, deliberate drag, like bare feet across old wood. She didn't turn. She couldn't. The voice came again, low and patient, almost kind. "Do you remember when you lied?" Her mouth was dry. "Lied about what?" The answer came not from one place, but from everywhere. From the walls. The floor. The air in her lungs. "You said you didn't open the cellar?" Marla pressed her hands to her ears, squeezed her eyes shut. "Stop it. I was a child. You left the door open. You weren't real," she shouted, the sound bouncing off the tight walls. Then, click. The door behind her unlocked. She turned, not daring to breathe, and slowly pulled it open. The hallway beyond was dark. But at the far end, tall enough to scrape the ceiling, he stood. The tall man. Unmoving. Watching. Even though he had no eyes. He didn't move. He didn't need to. The tall man stood in silence at the end of the hallway, his silhouette impossible. His head grazed the ceiling, and his arms dangled far below his knees like ropes of shadow. No features, just a long, lean void in the shape of a man. Marla stood frozen in the doorway. He was too far to touch her. But the hallway felt smaller now, narrower, as though the house was squeezing in around her, guiding her toward him. The floor groaned beneath her feet, not from her own weight, but something beneath the floorboards. Something moving under the surface like worms in rotting wood. Then the walls, peeling, warped, exhaled. All down the hallway, the wallpaper began to bubble outward in strange lumps. Rounded shapes, pushing from inside the wall. Fingers, hands, faces pressed into the surface from the other side, as if 100 people were trapped beneath the skin of the house and trying to claw their way out. They did not scream. They murmured. Not words. Just sounds. 1,000 whispers overlapping. "You shouldn't be here." She broke the promise. "Let us out." Marla backed into the small room, her hands still gripping the doorframe. "No," she said aloud. "No, this is some kind of psychotic break, or mold hallucination, or..." The tall man took one step forward. Not rushed. Not violent. Just one long, impossible stride that covered nearly half the hall. The temperature dropped instantly. Her breath fogged in the air. Marla slammed the door again, her flashlight flickering back to life as if it sensed her fear. The room around her looked the same, but the drawings were gone. Only one remained, on the floor. A fresh one. Drawn in what looked like dried blood and dirt. It showed Marla, standing in front of the steel door in the cellar, her hand on the handle, her sister behind it, eyes wide with terror. And in the corner of the drawing, smaller, barely visible, the tall man, smiling, and written beneath in block letters. She let him in. Marla stared at the drawing on the floor, her pulse thunderous in her ears. Her name, her face, it had been drawn with uncanny accuracy, down to the line of her jaw and the frizz of her hair. The crayon's red was too dark. Not waxy. Sticky. It had soaked into the floorboard. "Who did this?" she whispered, already fearing the answer. No reply came. Only the room breathing. The walls flexed again, subtly, swelling in and out, like lungs. Then the silence began to crawl. It started in her ears, a strange pressure, like when an airplane descends too quickly. A deep, internal silence that muffled even her own breath. Then it crept down her throat, curled inside her chest, as if something inside the room was draining sound itself. Marla tried to step forward, but her limbs felt weighted. The flashlight flickered, then failed. No more buzzing electricity. No more hum from the outside world. Just silence. Thick and suffocating. Then she heard them. Scratching. Tiny, deliberate movements. Like nails tapping, scraping, crawling through drywall. She spun toward the corner of the room. A bulge had formed beneath the peeling wallpaper. Something was moving behind it. Pressing, stretching, testing. She backed into the opposite corner, hands trembling. The wallpaper split with a quiet rip, and a pale hand emerged, small, childlike, trembling. Then another. Fingers gripped the edges of the torn paper and peeled it back like a curtain. A little face emerged. Eyes sunken, skin like wax, lips sewn shut with the same black thread once used on the doll. Lena. Not Lena. She crawled free of the wall like it was a thin sheet of skin, dragging her legs behind her with jerky, broken movements. Her sewn mouth twitched as if trying to speak, dark fluid dripping from the stitches. She reached out. Marla couldn't move. The girl's fingers brushed her shoe, cold, sticky. And with that touch, the silence snapped. A sound like wood cracking, nails tearing, and voices screaming all at once erupted from the walls. The drawings ignited an invisible flame, curling in on themselves. And from behind the girl's torn mouth came a single word. Help! Marla fell to her knees, not from pain, but from weight. The sound that burst from the girl's mouth seemed to push down on the room, like a pressure wave crashing through the air. Every board, every nail, every breath felt pulled towards something below. The stitched girl, Lena, or what remained of her, began to crumble. Her face sagged inward, skin folding like wet paper. Her eyes rolled back, and she collapsed in a quiet heap of ash and straw. Marla reached for her, but her hand passed through dust. And where the child had touched her shoe, a black root now curled up through the floorboards, twisting around her ankle. She screamed and kicked it loose, stumbling backward. The floor gave a deep groan. Then it cracked. A jagged seam opened from wall to wall, and the wooden boards split like ribs, revealing a dark, yawning hole beneath her. It wasn't the cellar. This was deeper, blacker. The air that surged up from it was foul, stagnant, earthy, with a hint of something spoiled and alive. From the pit came whispers. Not like before, not confused or distant. These were chanting, low and rhythmic. Dozens of voices, maybe more. Some human, some not. Marla stood at the edge, arms shaking. Something was down there, waiting. And then laughter. High, lilting, and soft. A child's laugh. She whirled, expecting to see the ghostly Lena again, but instead, she saw the drawing on the floor reappearing, line by line, as if an invisible hand was sketching it anew. But this time, the figure in the drawing wasn't behind the cellar door. It was Marla. Drawn small, curled up, trapped in the walls, eyes wide, mouth stitched. And towering above her, with impossibly long limbs stretched across the house, was the tall man, holding a key in one hand, and her heart in the other. The voices below chanted louder. She opened it. She opened it. She opened it. A hand reached up from the pit, long and gray and jointless. It caressed the floor beside her foot, and withdrew, as if testing, inviting. Marla didn't move. The chant still vibrated in her chest, and the hand, long and fingerless, had slipped back beneath the boards like it had never existed. But its touch left a mark. The floor where it had touched was cracked now, edges curled up like peeled bark. From the split wood, black liquid oozed, thick and slow like tar. It pulsed once, and stilled. The whispering stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. Then, from behind her, something clinked softly. Metallic. Hollow. She turned. On the warped windowsill sat a small iron key. Rough-hewn old. The teeth were jagged, and the stem was bent slightly, like it had been pulled from something that didn't want to let it go. She didn't remember it being there. She stepped toward it slowly, each movement loud in the crushing stillness. The key was warm when she picked it up. She turned it over in her hand, and noticed an engraving carved along the shaft. The letters were small, worn down, but still legible. Return what was taken. Marla closed her hand around it. She knew what it meant. The steel door in the cellar. The one with no handle. No hinges. No way in. Until now. No, she whispered aloud. No, I can't. But her feet were already moving. Down the hall. Down the stairs. Through the kitchen, where the light bulb above the sink flickered dimly, trying to come back to life. She paused at the trapdoor. The rug was already folded back. The door was open. A light shone from below, faint, golden, like a memory of a fire. She descended, one step at a time, the key clutched tight in her palm. When she reached the bottom, the cellar felt different. Warmer. Less oppressive. The jars of old preserves still lined the shelves, but now the labels were written in fresh ink, dates from just days ago. Someone had been down here recently. The steel door waited at the far end, silent. No knocking. No voice. Only her own breath, loud in her ears. She stepped forward and raised the key. It slid into a nearly invisible keyhole just above the vertical eye slit. The metal resisted at first, then turned with a click. The door let out a sound like a sigh. The lock disengaged. And slowly, so slowly, it began to open. From the dark beyond it, a single voice whispered. It was never just her. The door opened inward, revealing blackness deeper than night. Not the absence of light, but the devouring of it. Her phone flashlight, though flickering to life again, barely reached past the threshold. The beam stopped like it had struck something invisible. Marla stepped forward. The air on the other side was dry. Still. And wrong. Not stale, not musty, just vacant, as if nothing had breathed here in centuries. The moment she crossed the threshold, the door behind her slammed shut. She jumped and spun, heart thudding. The key was gone. She pounded on the steel, no echo. Nothing. No way back. She turned slowly, pressing her palm to the rough stone wall to orient herself. The texture was ancient, crumbling in some places, smooth in others, like it had been worn by countless hands. Symbols had been scratched into the surface, some simple, some looping like cursive in a language she didn't know. She moved forward. The ground sloped slightly, descending into the belly of the house. Her footfalls echoed now, soft, distant, as though the space around her had grown. Then she heard it. Breathing. Not her own. Ragged. Uneven. Labored. Like lungs long and used. She froze, letting her eyes adjust. Something moved ahead, just a ripple of shadow within shadow. And with it came a smell, earth and copper, wet stone and burnt sugar. It clawed at her memory. The orchard. That's what it reminded her of. The one behind her childhood home. Sweet apples turning rotten beneath the trees, mixed with blood from a bird she'd found crushed beneath a rusted rake. Her hand brushed something on the wall. A hook. Then another. A dozen of them, rusted and half buried in stone. As if the walls once held bodies. Chains clinked faintly in the dark. A low voice rasped just ahead, breaking the silence like a knife through silk. "Do you still dream of her?" Marla flinched. The voice wasn't angry. It was tired. She stepped closer, flashlight beam stuttering as it caught movement. A figure sat curled in the center of the room. Thin. Bone pale. Wrapped in what looked like rotting curtains or the remnants of a child's nightgown. The voice came again, quieter. "You should have stayed gone." The girl in the center of the room didn't look up. She rocked gently, arms wrapped around her knees, strands of hair falling in wet ropes over her face. Her skin looked stretched, pale as candle wax, and cracked at the joints. Where her feet touched the stone floor, small puddles had formed, like she was leaking. Marla's mouth opened, but no sound came. She already knew who it was. "Lena," she whispered, the name sharp in her throat. The girl stilled. Slowly, she lifted her face. But it wasn't the Lena from the drawings. Not the stitched doll child. This version of her was older, about 16. The age she would have been, if she'd grown up. Her eyes were pale gray, cloudy, rimmed in red. Her lips trembled as she tried to smile, but the skin tore at the corners. "You buried me," she said softly. Marla staggered back. "No, I didn't. I looked for you. Everyone did." Lena cocked her head. "You left me in the roots." "No, that wasn't." "You left me." Marla's knees gave, and she dropped to the floor. "I was 10. I didn't know. I thought you went missing. I thought." But she remembered now. The cellar. Not this one, but another. A door they'd been told to stay away from. They'd opened it. On a dare. And inside, something had whispered. Something had asked for one of them. Lena had screamed. And Marla had run. The guilt had festered for years, warped by time and therapy and the fragile scaffolding of denial. Now it lay bare. Lena rose slowly, the sound of bones scraping inside her limbs. "You opened the door," she said again, not accusing, just stating. "I didn't know." "You knew. He promised you'd forget. And you did. You left me here to rot with him." A slow, wet dragging sound emerged behind Lena. Something huge shifted in the dark. From the shadows, limbs unfolded. Not arms. Not legs. Roots. They coiled along the walls, pulsing, whispering. The tall man did not speak. He didn't need to. He watched. And Lena stepped aside. "He wants you to finish it," she said. Marla's fingers tightened around the only thing she had left, the iron key, warm again in her pocket. The root limbs of the tall man twisted upward, brushing the stone ceiling like black veins pulsing through the house. Marla could feel him, Not see him clearly, but feel him, looming just beyond the edge of her vision. He was taller now, more massive than before, no longer a figure but a presence. Heavy, patient, ancient. Lena stepped forward. Her nightgown dragged across the floor, damp with rot. Her eyes glimmered with something between sorrow and hunger. "He gave me a choice once," she said, her voice distant. "But I didn't choose fast enough." Marla stood shakily, the key cold in her hand now. "What does he want?" "You," Lena whispered. The stone room rippled. Not physically, but in the air itself, as if time stuttered for just a moment. The whispers returned, louder now. Some wept. Some screamed. Some pleaded. "He feeds on promises," Lena said. "On choices. You broke your word. You left the door open. And now he's hungry again." Marla looked around. "There's nothing here." "There's everything here," Lena said. "Every broken oath, every rotten lie, every forgotten child in the walls. You don't walk away from that." The roots slithered closer, curling around Lena's ankles like pets. One brushed Marla's shoulder, soft as a feather, but ice cold. It left a black smear across her collarbone, like bruised ink spreading beneath her skin. "You can end it," Lena said. "He'll take you in my place. You owe him." Marla laughed, harsh, broken. "You think I'll just give myself to him?" Lena's face changed then. Something dark bloomed behind her eyes. "You already did." And in that moment, the room vanished. Marla was no longer in the cellar. She was 10 years old again, standing in the orchard. Lena was next to her, barefoot and smiling, daring her to open the old storm door near the tree line. "Just once," Lena had said. "We'll only look." And Marla had said yes. The latch had opened with a sound like a sigh. Now, in the echo of memory, the tall man waited, no longer behind the door, but everywhere. The key burned in her hand. "You made the bargain," Lena whispered. "You just forgot." The cellar, the roots, the stone, all of it had dissolved. Now Marla stood barefoot in brittle grass, beneath the gray hush of an orchard sky. The trees loomed in twisted rows, branches like crooked fingers reaching into the clouds. Apples hung overhead too ripe, bursting on the ground with the smell of vinegar and decay. She looked down. She was small again. A child. Dressed in the same yellow sundress she'd worn that summer, the one her mother sewed by hand. Her knees were scraped. A smear of dirt painted one shin. The iron key, heavy and old, still hung from a string around her neck. Across from her stood Lena, 6 years old, smiling. Her eyes weren't hollow here. Her mouth was unstitched. She held a stick in one hand, tapping it rhythmically against her thigh, her teeth chewing her lip the way she always had when nervous but excited. "Come on," Lena said. "You promised." The orchard stretched behind them. Just ahead, barely visible beneath creeping vines and moss, the old storm door jutted from the earth like a wound. Rusty hinges. A sagging latch. Marla's 10-year-old self looked down at the key around her neck. "I don't want to anymore," she said quietly. Lena tilted her head. "But we already said yes. He's waiting." A chill whispered through the orchard. The trees creaked, windless, and the ground shivered. Marla turned toward the door. Now it looked more like a mouth, hinges curled like lips, the metal streaked with dark stains. A faint thumping came from beneath it. "Knock, knock, knock." "You said we'd be together forever," Lena whispered. "Even if it got dark." Marla tried to step away, but the ground sucked at her feet, roots coiling just beneath the surface, waiting to pull her down. The latch lifted on its own. The door opened with a groan. Inside was a spiral staircase, descending into blackness. Marla's child voice echoed out of her mouth. "We're not supposed to." But Lena was already walking down, and Marla followed, because she always had. The steps beneath the orchard door were slick with moss and old water, carved from stone too smooth to be natural. Marla's bare feet slipped more than once, but the descent was relentless. Each step echoed, not just in her ears, but in her bones, vibrating deep and low, like the house beneath the earth was humming to her. Lena's small figure bobbed ahead in the dark. She didn't need a flashlight. She moved like she remembered the way. Marla called out, her voice sounding small and distant in this strange, spiraling void. "Lena, wait, please." But Lena didn't stop. She only said, "He likes it when we come together." The staircase ended in a vast, low-ceiling chamber lit by candlelight that flickered with no wind. The flames moved as if breathing, like each held its own pulse. The walls were covered in carvings, not symbols, but faces. Hundreds of them. Each stretched in silent screams, mouths open in stone agony. The eyes were carved deepest. Some had scratches over them. Some were gouged completely out. The floor was soil. Black. Wet. Alive. Roots grew across it like veins in skin. And in the center of the room stood the tree. If it was a tree, its bark was gray, knotted. Its limbs spread into the ceiling and disappeared beyond the stone. The trunk was split down the middle, forming a vertical hollow large enough for a child to stand in, or be placed in. Marla staggered toward it, and she saw herself, 10 years old, standing before the tree, watching as Lena stepped into its hollow. "I don't want to anymore," young Marla said, but the roots were already curling around Lena's legs. "Then why did you open it?" the girl asked. The tree shuddered, a sound like lungs filling, and the tall man's voice seeped from the wood itself, whispering not in language, but in intention, in ancient hunger, in memory. He didn't speak in words. He showed her everything: the cellar, the house, the deal, the forgetting, and the cost. Lena turned to her, bound in roots, eyes wide and sad. "You left me here." The trunk of the tree pulsed faintly, slow, like a heartbeat buried deep in ancient soil. Marla stepped forward, and the memory of her younger self flickered and dissolved like smoke. Only Lena remained, still curled within the tree's hollow, held fast by the roots wrapping her legs and arms, her body barely taller than the hollow itself. Her eyes followed Marla with unblinking sorrow. "I waited," Lena whispered. "I waited a long time." Marla reached out, fingers trembling, brushing the edge of the bark. The texture was wrong. Not like wood. Not rough and dry, but slick, warm. It shivered beneath her touch, like muscle twitching under skin. The moment her palm touched it fully, the tree opened wider. Inside, beyond Lena, there were bones. Dozens. Some small. Some too small. Stacked neatly. Children's shoes. Buttons. Dolls with no eyes. Hair, matted and fossilized into the walls like ivy. Marla staggered back, bow rising in her throat. "What is this?" she gasped. "It's the house," Lena said. "The real one. The one underneath." The candles flickered wildly, flames elongating into sharp, flickering points. The carved faces on the walls began to twitch, their mouths flexing, eyes rolling in their sockets. And through it all came the tall man's voice, not spoken aloud, but from within her. He showed her every deal. Every door opened. Every child taken. He had lived in many houses. Some were mansions. Some were cabins. Some just rooms, forgotten and unloved. But all of them had walls. And the walls remembered everything. "Why me?" Marla cried out. "Why us?" Lena's face was still. "You open the door," she said again. "That's all he ever needs." The roots snapped tighter around her, pulling her gently into the tree. She didn't fight. She didn't scream. She just looked at Marla and said, "He can still be fed." And with a sharp crack, the tree began to close. Marla lunged forward, hands outstretched. "Lena, no, wait!" But the tree didn't stop. Its bark folded inward like a mouth sealing shut, swallowing Lena whole. Her face was the last to vanish, calm, unreadable, eyes fixed on Marla even as the wood swallowed them. The chamber darkened. The candles hissed and went out all at once, leaving only the dull red glow pulsing beneath the tree's roots. The carved stone faces on the walls began to weep. Not tears, blood. It oozed from their eyes and mouths, trickling down the stone and into the soil. Marla fell to her knees, too stunned to scream. The whispers returned, louder than before. Not distant anymore. Now they surrounded her. And beneath them, the tall man breathed. She felt it more than heard it. Each inhale stretched the walls. Each exhale made the room shudder. "You opened the door," a voice whispered beside her ear. "You fed the roots," said another from behind her. "You made the promise." She squeezed her eyes shut. "Take me," she muttered. "Take me, not her." Silence. Then laughter. Not cruel. Not mocking. Worse. Amused. "You don't understand," the tall man whispered, not in words but in sensation. In meaning. Lena was already his. Marla was simply unfinished. A thread not fully pulled. A debt half paid. The floor split beneath her. Roots surged upward, curling around her arms and legs. Not violent. Intentional. Like fingers helping her stand. And before her, the tree split once more. But it wasn't empty now. It had grown something new. A second hollow. Her size. Her shape. Waiting. The whisper rose inside her bones. One sister gave. The other must remember. Her feet moved. She didn't want them to. But her body walked. Toward the hollow. Her breath caught. Inside the bark, something breathed back. Marla's feet touched the soft black soil at the base of the hollow. Her breath came in shallow gasps. Every instinct screamed to turn back. To run. To claw her way through the roots and shadows, back to the staircase, back to the surface. But there was no surface now. Not really. There hadn't been since the moment she reopened the cellar door. The tree leaned inward, groaning softly, its bark creaking like bones under pressure. Inside the second hollow, the air pulsed. It wasn't empty. She stepped closer and saw herself. Not a mirror. Not a hallucination. Another Marla. A reflection without glass. She stood perfectly still in the hollow, skin pale, hair matted with soil and spider webs. Her dress was soaked in black sap. Her eyes were closed, lips sewn with the same rough thread the doll had once worn. The thing's chest rose and fell in shallow rhythm, breathing. Marla staggered back. "No, that's not me." The tall man's voice slid through her thoughts like oil. "You left her here. You forgot. She kept your place." The second Marla's eyes opened. They were hollow. Gray. Milk white. Rotting at the edges. The stitched lips twitched as if trying to speak. One word formed beneath the threads. "Liar." The roots curled around Marla's wrists again, not tight. Gentle. Guiding. She fought. She kicked. She screamed into the suffocating dark. But the more she resisted, the closer the world seemed to pull her in. The walls wept louder. The carved faces watched. And the other Marla stepped forward. They stood face to face. The hollow version reached out. And as their fingertips touched, Marla's mind cracked wide open. She saw the storm cellar again. Saw Lena falling. But in this version, Marla hadn't run. She had pushed. Not in hate. Not in fear. Out of curiosity. Out of that childish, cruel desire to know what would happen if someone stayed inside. The truth, buried for decades, bloomed in her chest like poison. "I did this," she whispered. The second Marla nodded once. And smiled. The smile on the other Marla's face widened, thread snapping from her lips one stitch at a time. No blood. Just that same black sap dripping from her mouth like ink bleeding through paper. She leaned in and whispered, "You left the door open, and it never closed." The world tilted. Not metaphorically, literally. The roots buckled beneath Marla's feet, and the chamber spun like a clock wound backward. The tree groaned again, deeper this time, from somewhere below its roots. A rumble that wasn't just sound, but memory dragging itself upward. Marla fell to her knees. The faces in the walls opened their mouths and screamed. Not loud, not angry, weeping. Hundreds of them. Children, adults, even infants, carved in perfect, frozen terror. Their cries didn't echo. They folded inward, collapsing into the tree, into her, into the house itself. And through all of it, the tall man's presence thickened. Not visible anymore. Just felt. In her skin. In her spine. In her teeth. She clutched her skull, gasping. I didn't know. I was a child. The roots hissed. You chose. The second Marla began to merge with the tree again, one foot vanishing into the hollow, her hands still outstretched. Waiting. Inviting. If Marla took it, if she stepped inside, it would end. No more running. No more memory. Just quiet. A final promise kept. But something resisted inside her. Small. Defiant. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't fear. It was rage. I didn't understand, she said aloud, the words shaking as they escaped her. But I do now. The tall man paused. The roots froze mid-twist. She stood. And the second Marla screamed. Not with sound. With every part of the room. The tree exploded into motion, roots whipping like lashes, the hollow widening like a throat preparing to swallow. The open door was still waiting. But this time, Marla wasn't going to walk in. Marla rose from the earth, fists clenched, lungs burning. The black sap that coated the tree now ran in rivulets down the roots, pooling at her feet. It sizzled where it touched her skin, not burning, but remembering, as though it was trying to rewrite her again from the inside out. But she wouldn't let it. Not this time. The hollow Marla, half consumed by the tree, shrieked wordlessly, her mouth torn open wide, wider than human jaws could go. Her teeth were black shards. Her eyes were burning holes, smoke rising from them like smoldering paper. The tree roared with her, the room trembling beneath its power. Still, Marla stood firm. No, she said louder now. You don't get to feed on me anymore. The candlelight that had long gone out flickered back on. One, then another, then a dozen, then all. A warmth sparked in Marla's chest, small, flickering but alive. Like a match caught in wind, desperate to survive. It wasn't given by the house. It wasn't part of the deal. It was hers. A memory surfaced. A real one. Lena, clutching Marla's hand by the apple tree. Promise me, she'd whispered. We won't be afraid of the dark. Not. Don't leave me. Not. Never go down there again. Just that one promise, don't be afraid. And she had broken it. Not by opening the door, but by letting fear win. I'm not afraid of you, Marla whispered now, eyes fixed on the tall man's towering form. More suggestion than shape, rising behind the tree, filling the ceiling, pressing through the walls. The roots lashed toward her. She didn't run. She reached into her coat pocket, deep, instinctively, and her fingers closed around something cold. The iron key, still with her, but now glowing softly. She held it up, and the tall man flinched. Just a ripple in the shadows. A moment. Enough. The key burned bright, and the candle flames joined it, fusing into a single blaze of light that flared through the roots, through the carvings, up into the tree. The hollow shrieked. The bark split open like skin. The roots recoiled. And the tall man whispered, for the first and only time, in a voice that sounded afraid. She remembers. The light from the iron key pulsed, steady and strong, until the entire chamber glowed with a golden, unnatural heat. The roots recoiled like burned flesh. The carved faces on the walls screamed once more, not in pain, but in release. Cracks split the stone, and voices bled through, children laughing, a woman humming, a clock chiming the hour. Memories. The house was giving them back. The tall man hissed. Not a breath, an exhale of fury. His body, once towering and untouchable, began to shrink. Shadows coiled in on themselves. His limbs, so long they brushed the ceiling, now trembled like dead branches in wind. The walls around him began to shudder. The entire house was trembling. From the roots to the rafters, it shook in agony. Floorboards split upstairs. Windows shattered in the forgotten hallway. Somewhere, a door slammed over and over again. Boom. 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 He was trying to hold it together, trying to seal it again. But it was too late. The promise had been broken, not by fear, but by defiance. Marla raised the key higher. The heat around her burned the air itself, singeing her clothes, cracking her lips. And still, she stood. The tree moaned, groaned, screamed. Black sap exploded from its trunk, splattering the chamber walls. The hollow where the other Marla had stood was now empty, burned clean. Lena's voice rang out from the canopy above, clear and young. "Don't let him close it again." And then the roots surged toward Marla one last time, desperate, wild, hungry. She hurled the key into the heart of the tree. The impact made no sound. Just a crack, quiet and final. The tree split clean in half, from base to crown. Light poured from inside it, blinding, white, endless. The tall man screamed, not aloud, but through the walls, the floor, the bones of the house. A sound of rage and hunger and defeat. Then he was gone. The shadows peeled away. The stone collapsed inward, and the walls began to fall. The walls cracked like ice on a frozen lake. Chunks of stone dropped from the ceiling, smashing into the floor. The roots, once pulsing with black life, shriveled into brittle vines and snapped apart. The once living tree, split down its center, burned not with fire, but with light, glowing from the inside out like a lantern carved from bone. Marla stumbled backward. The stone beneath her feet trembled. Fissures spread in every direction, tearing through the soil floor like veins rupturing beneath skin. The chamber groaned, then screamed. Dust filled the air. The faces in the walls crumbled, the final scream fading into silence as their stone mouths collapsed into dust. The spiral staircase was gone, swallowed by the collapse. There was no path back. Marla turned in circles, coughing, visions swimming in the golden glow of the crumbling tree. "Lena!" she shouted. "Where are you?" No answer. A low thunder rolled beneath her. The ground opened just inches from her toes. She staggered and fell, catching herself on the burned husk of a root. It cracked beneath her touch but held, barely. She crawled toward the far wall, eyes darting, lungs heaving. Then she saw it. A door. Wooden. Old. Unpainted. She hadn't noticed it before. Maybe it hadn't been there before. But now it stood alone, slightly ajar, with warm light glowing beyond it. A door that didn't belong. With no time to question, she ran for it. Roots curled and snapped under her feet, trying to trip her, drag her down. But she leapt over them, bruised and bloodied and still moving. She reached the door, shoved it open, fell through, and found herself in her childhood bedroom, just like it had been 20 years ago. The faded wallpaper with yellow stars, the mobile above the bed, the dresser with glow-in-the-dark stickers. It was still, safe, whole. She turned. The doorway was gone. So was the light. Only silence remained, until a voice whispered from the closet. Small, familiar. "Can I come out now?" Marla froze. Her childhood room was impossibly still. The glow-in-the-dark stars didn't glow anymore. Dust motes drifted lazily in beams of amber light leaking through slatted blinds, casting striped shadows across the bedspread. The same quilt her mother had sewn when she was 5. But it all felt wrong, like a memory left out too long in the sun. The closet door was shut. It hadn't been before. And from behind it, the voice came again. Quieter this time. Softer. "Can I come out now?" It wasn't Lena's voice. It was Marla's. Younger. From before the orchard. Before the door. Before the lie. She stepped closer. The floor groaned beneath her like it was tired, weary from holding this memory together for so long. She reached the closet door and hesitated, her hand resting on the familiar knob, pink plastic, shaped like a heart. Her breath caught in her throat. She whispered, "Who's in there?" The voice replied instantly, "You left me here." Her heart dropped. It was her. The part that never left. The part that remembered everything, trapped behind the door since the first time she'd lied. The moment she looked her parents in the eyes, said she didn't know where Lena went, and sealed it all away. "I didn't know what would happen," she said aloud. "I didn't mean. But you did it," the voice answered. "And you never came back." Her hand turned the knob. The door creaked open. Inside, crouched in the darkness, was a small girl. Marla, 8 years old. Tear-streaked. Pale. Her arms wrapped around her knees. Her hair tangled. Her eyes wide and knowing. "You said we wouldn't be afraid," the little girl said. Marla knelt in the doorway. "I know." The girl's head tilted slightly. "Are you ready to remember all of it now?" Marla didn't answer right away. But then, she nodded. "Yes." The little girl smiled for the first time, and reached out her hand. The moment Marla's hand met her younger self's, a current passed between them, warm, aching, and deeply familiar. The closet dissolved around them like fog touched by morning sun, revealing not just memories, but the feelings behind them. Shame, guilt, love, curiosity, and fear. So much fear. But also something else she hadn't expected. Loneliness. Not Lena's. Hers. The room faded, and they stood now in the orchard again, this time, just before sunset. The air held that syrupy golden stillness of a summer evening. Wind whispered gently through the trees. Birds chirped. A bee hovered near a blossom. Marla watched herself. 10 years old. Lena dancing circles around her, barefoot in the grass. "We can go look," Lena said, grinning, her fingers stained red from a crushed apple. "Just for a second. I bet there's frogs inside." Young Marla hesitated. "Mom said no." "But you're not Mom," Lena teased. Then, with a wild giggle, she ran toward the storm cellar. Marla didn't follow right away. She stared down at her hand, the iron key glinting in the evening light. She'd forgotten how excited she'd been to have it. How special it made her feel. The keeper of the key. Trusted. Brave. She ran after her sister. Down the path. To the mouth of the cellar. Lena was already on the stairs. "I just want a peek," she said. But when she reached the bottom, the whisper came. From behind the dark. Low. Luring. "Just one." And young Marla had felt it. That pull. That wicked gravity. She could go in. She could take her sister's hand. But instead, she closed the door. Fast. Hand shaking. Breath held. Not with malice. Not even with fear. But because, in that tiny moment, she wanted to know what would happen. That had been the truth. The whole truth. She hadn't run away. She had sealed it. Her child self now looked up at her, eyes brimming with the full weight of that memory. "I didn't mean to," Marla whispered. "But I did it anyway." The little girl nodded. And then, she let go of Marla's hand, and disappeared. The orchard faded like a dream slipping through fingers. Marla gasped as cold air rushed into her lungs. The golden light of memory dimmed into gray, and the scent of blossoms gave way to mildew and rot. She stood once again in the house, her house, but something had changed. The walls were no longer swollen with secrets. The roots no longer writhed beneath the floor. The silence was real. No whispers, no knocking, just stillness. She was standing at the base of the stairs. Above her, faint morning light spilled through the broken windows. The house had begun to crumble from within. The corners sagged, the wallpaper sloughed from the walls like old skin, and the fireplace, so long cold, was filled with black ash. The doll lay at her feet, face down, unmoving. Marla stepped over it, and crossed the living room. Her legs trembled, sore from running, from crawling, from remembering. But with every step, something loosened in her chest. That old, familiar pressure she'd lived with her whole life, the ache she could never quite name, was gone. She passed the photo in the hallway. It still hung crooked. But the man in the frame no longer smiled. He was gone. His face, once so sharply carved in black and white contrast, had blurred. His eyes were faint. The suit faded. A blank space in the glass where he had once stared out. The house had spit him out. And with him, it had spit out the lie. Marla stood at the front door. Her hand reached for the knob. But she paused. Something brushed her shoulder. She turned. Lena stood behind her. No longer the stitched ghost child. Not the pale, broken girl trapped inside the tree. Just Lena. 16, maybe. Whole. Her hair clean. Her skin warm with color. She smiled gently. "I couldn't leave until you remembered," she said. Tears slipped down Marla's cheeks. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know." They stood together in silence for a long time. Then Lena said, "It's okay now. You can go." Marla nodded, turned the knob, and stepped outside into the morning. The morning air stung with clarity. Sunlight poured over the collapsed porch, casting long shadows across the overgrown grass. Dew clung to every blade, catching the light like shattered glass. For the first time since arriving, the fog was gone, burned away completely. The woods beyond the fence line no longer felt like a mouth waiting to close. Marla stepped down onto the dirt path. Her shoes were gone, but the earth beneath her felt real. Cool. Rooted. She looked back at the house. It leaned slightly to one side, as if tired. The windows were empty sockets. The roof had sagged further since the night before, and smoke no longer curled from the chimney. It wasn't alive anymore. But it wasn't quite dead either. More like asleep. Waiting. She almost turned to leave. Almost. But something held her in place. Not a sound. Not a shadow. A feeling. She stepped off the path and circled around the back of the house, through tall grass and rustling weeds. The earth was soft here, too soft. Her foot sank slightly. Then again. A hollow spot. She knelt, brushing away the topsoil with her fingers. There. A small metal box. Rusty. Familiar. She pulled it free and opened the latch. Inside was a collection of small things. A hair ribbon, Lena's favorite, red with white stars. A broken piece of chalk. The missing button from the doll. A folded piece of paper, brown with age. She opened the note slowly. It was her own handwriting. Crooked. Childlike. For when she comes back. Her heart caught. She didn't remember writing it. But she knew she had. Buried it as a child. Out of guilt. Out of hope. She held it to her chest, eyes closing. The trees whispered. But not in voices this time. Just wind. She turned back to the path. Walked slowly toward her car, still waiting where she left it, dusty and quiet. She didn't look back again. But the house watched her leave. And something inside it smiled. Not hungry anymore. Just waiting. Because walls never forget. 3 weeks later, the house stood silent beneath a slate-gray sky. Rain ticked softly on the porch roof. Weeds had overtaken the driveway, curling through the gravel. The mailbox hung open, rust streaking its sides. A crow perched on the sagging porch railing, watching the road with one unblinking eye. Then, a car engine. A dark green station wagon pulled up, tires crunching along the neglected path. A woman stepped out, her coat already dotted with rain. She stood for a moment, staring at the house. Her posture tense. Not afraid, uncertain. She checked her phone. No signal. Behind her, a little girl climbed out of the passenger side. Maybe 6. Her hair was braided neatly, and she clutched a rain-spotted stuffed rabbit. "Mom?" she asked, pointing. "Is that it?" The woman nodded slowly. "Yeah." That's the one. They walked up the creaking steps together. The girl paused on the threshold. It looks sad. The woman smiled, though her eyes didn't. It's just old. They stepped inside. Dust clouded the air. The wallpaper was more peeled now, curling at the edges like burned parchment. But the air was calm. The silence bearable. Go explore, the woman said, brushing rain from her coat. Just stay where I can hear you. The girl nodded and skipped down the hallway. She passed the broken grandfather clock, past the photo, now empty, and turned toward the narrow closet tucked beneath the stairs. Drawn to it, something glinted in the dust. She knelt and picked it up. A small iron key. Jagged. Worn. Still warm. She held it up to the dim light and whispered, "Is this for me?" Somewhere deep within the walls, a slow scratching began again. Soft. Welcoming. The little girl turned the key over in her hand. It felt heavier than it looked. And older than her, older than the house, even. The grooves were worn smooth by time, and yet, they still shimmered faintly in the dusty light. She looked up at the closet. Its door wasn't locked, but she didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, she listened. Scratch, scratch. The sound came not from behind the door, but within the walls. Like something had stirred when her fingers touched the key. A quiet, excited stir. Not angry. Not hungry. Just hopeful. She tilted her head. "Hello?" she whispered. The scratching paused. Then, tap, tap, tap. She smiled. "Okay," she said softly. "I hear you." Down the hall, her mother was calling, but the voice was far away, as if the house muffled it gently. Not in malice. Just to keep things quiet. She stood and approached the closet door, key clutched tight in one hand, rabbit dangling from the other. The knob turned easily. The closet smelled like old wood and forgotten books. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, its pull chain wrapped twice around itself like a noose. She stepped inside. The door drifted closed behind her, not with a slam, but a sigh. In the quiet, she saw the outline of something on the back wall. A square panel. Almost invisible. Just slightly uneven with the rest of the wood. She pressed her palm to it. It breathed. A low, warm whisper slid from behind it. A voice not entirely human. "Welcome home." The girl smiled again, sat cross-legged in the dust, and began to draw in the grime with her finger. A house. A tree. 2 girls. And something tall in the corner. Watching. Waiting. Smiling. The girl's finger moved slowly through the dust, etching pictures the way children do when their mind is quiet and the world around them softens. She didn't rush. She listened. To the scratching. To the gentle taps. They came like lullabies now. Encouraging. Reassuring. Behind the closet's false wall, something shifted. A draft pushed out, a breath of warm, cinnamon-sweet air, tinged faintly with soil. The girl paused, smiled, and wiped her palm against her skirt before tracing a window into her dust house. She leaned forward and whispered to the key in her hand. "Do you want to come out?" The key gave no reply, but it hummed slightly in her fingers. She turned toward the wall, pressed her palm against the wooden panel. This time it moved. A click. A shudder. A sliver of shadow as the panel opened inward, revealing a narrow space just wide enough for her to crawl through. The space beyond smelled like chalk and rain. Inside, the walls were covered, not with wallpaper or paneling, but with drawings. Thousands of them. Some faded. Some fresh. Some carved into the wood with nails or bone or fingers. Some scratched in dust. Others pinned like pages torn from forgotten journals. Each one different. Each one the same. Children. Girls. Always 2. One curious. One afraid. And always him. The tall one. At the edge. Waiting. The girl crawled inside, dragging her stuffed rabbit behind her, and sat cross-legged in the center of the hidden room. She stared at the drawings. Not afraid. Just interested. "Who drew all these?" she whispered. The wall beside her creaked. Then, very softly, from behind the farthest panel, a small voice answered. "I did." The girl tilted her head. The voice behind the panel was faint, like it had been curled up and quiet for too long. It sounded young, but older than her. Soft, tired, and kind. She leaned toward the wall. "Are you stuck?" A pause. Then, "Not stuck. Just resting." The girl looked around at the drawings. Her eyes settled on one that felt newer than the rest, drawn in red chalk. Two girls beneath a tree. One reaching, one watching. The tall man behind them, limbs stretching into the clouds. She touched it lightly. The voice behind the wall stirred. "You found the key," it said. "That means he likes you." The girl smiled. "He hasn't said anything. He never says much. But he's always listening." She hugged her rabbit a little tighter. "What's your name?" Silence. Then, reluctantly, "Lena." The girl blinked. "That's my mom's middle name," she said. Lena was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Is she here?" The girl nodded. "She's downstairs. She says we're just visiting. But I think she lived here before. Does she remember?" Lena asked, and her voice was suddenly smaller. "I don't think so," the girl replied. "She gets sad when I ask her about when she was little. Says there are too many blanks." Lena let out a breath, a soft, whistling sound behind the wood. "She used to draw with me," she whispered, before she closed the door. The girl traced the edges of the panel. "You don't have to stay in there," she said. "I do." "Why?" Lena's voice faltered. "Because if I come out, he might follow." The scratching returned, louder now, beneath the floor. A knock, too. Tap, tap, tap. The girl tilted her head again, unafraid. "Is that him?" Lena didn't answer. But the scratching kept coming. From behind the walls. From under the floor. From everywhere. The house was listening. And remembering. The girl ran her fingers along the edge of the panel, dust clinging to her skin like ash. Behind her, the scratching grew more insistent, not frantic, but eager. Playful. Tap, tap, tap. Scratch, scratch, tap. Lena's voice came again, softer now. "Don't answer it." "Why not?" the girl whispered. "Because when you answer," Lena said, "you're not the same anymore." The girl frowned, thinking. Then she said brightly, "That's okay. I want to be different." The closet creaked. The air grew warmer. The house pleased. Lena sounded almost panicked. "You don't understand. He wants you to promise something. That's how he starts." "What kind of promise?" "To stay. To listen. To forget." The girl hugged her rabbit. "But I like listening. That's how it starts." The panel trembled. A thin slit opened between the boards. Just enough for the girl to see Lena's eye, watching her from the dark. She looked tired. Older than she should be. And afraid. "I don't want you to stay here," Lena said. "Why not?" "Because then I'll never leave." A deep knock echoed through the house, like a fist against the very foundation. It reverberated through the hidden room. Dust fell from the ceiling. The drawings fluttered. The girl didn't flinch. She turned back to the center of the room and picked up a piece of chalk, red, crumbly, still warm. She drew a door. Small and simple. And beneath it, in block letters, "I promise." Lena gasped behind the panel. "No, don't write that. Don't give it to him." But it was too late. The house shuddered. The key in the girl's pocket burned. And far beneath the floorboards, in the place where roots never stopped growing, the tall man smiled. The drawing on the wall pulsed. The crayon lines glowed faintly, casting a red hue over the girl's cheeks as she stepped back to admire her work. Her stuffed rabbit slipped from her hand and landed quietly on the dusty floorboards, forgotten. Behind her, the panel that had been barely ajar creaked open wider. Lena's face was clearer now. Older. Thinner. Worn down by years of being watched. "Don't go in," Lena said. Her voice cracked. "Please. You can still leave." The girl turned and smiled, as if she were being invited to tea. "But I promised." From somewhere deeper in the house, a groan rose, long and low. The tall man was waking. Below the floorboards, the roots stretched and curled like snakes in warm soil. They remembered the taste of promises. They remembered Lena. And now, they had a new guest. A new whisper. The girl walked toward the back wall where her drawing of the doors shimmered. As she approached, the wall split, seamlessly, revealing a narrow hallway beyond, lit by a soft red glow. Not threatening. Inviting. The girl turned and looked back once at Lena. "I'll tell him you said hello," she said sweetly, and stepped inside. The hidden door closed behind her. Lena pressed her forehead against the panel, breath shallow. "Oh no. No, no, no." The scratching stopped. The house grew still. Too still. Until the laughter started. Not cruel. Not mocking. Childlike. It echoed through the walls like a skipping stone. Soft. Light. Perfectly content. And beneath that laughter, far, far below, the roots of the house began to spread again. Wider this time. Hungry. But patient. Always patient. Because the house had its next story. And this time, it was writing itself. The hallway beyond the secret door wasn't straight. It twisted gently, sloping downward like the spine of something ancient and sleeping. The air smelled like wet leaves and rust. The floor creaked beneath the girl's bare feet, not in protest, but in recognition. With each step, the red glow ahead pulsed brighter. She wasn't afraid. The girl's eyes sparkled in the dim light, and she hummed softly, an old tune she didn't know she knew. As she walked, drawings began to appear along the walls, not chalk or crayon this time, but etched into the wood itself. Her own name, her rabbit, her mother's face, a crooked tree, the house, and him. The tall man, limbs curled delicately around every picture, as though he had drawn them with her. The corridor opened into a round chamber, smaller than the tree room, but older, more real. In the center stood a chair, child-sized, carved from gnarled wood blackened with age. Roots crawled up its legs, not binding it, but growing from it, as though the chair had always been part of the house. Waiting. Above it, a lantern glowed softly, swinging though there was no breeze. The girl walked forward and sat. The roots shifted, curled gently around her feet like cats. She giggled. The light from the lantern shifted, dimmed, then brightened again. The walls responded. New drawings began to sketch themselves, line by line. Her in the chair. Her mother at the door. The key. The closet. The words, "I promise." She clutched the key in her pocket tighter, her thumb rubbing its groove. Then she heard him. Not footsteps. Not breathing. The hush. The sound of everything else going silent when he entered. And then the whisper, not spoken, but pressed into her thoughts. "Tell me your story." The girl smiled. And began. The house listened. It always listened. The girl sat in the blackwood chair, her hands folded politely in her lap, the key resting between her palms. Her feet dangled just above the dirt floor, brushing against soft moss and broken bits of forgotten toys half buried in the soil. The tall man did not speak. He never did. But his presence filled the room like smoke, curling in from the corners, heavy and warm. His limbs rested against the ceiling beams, watching, waiting. His shape flickered in the lantern light, never fully solid, never not there. The girl looked up at him, and began. "There was once a house," she said, voice soft but sure. "And the house had stories. But no one ever listened long enough to hear the whole one." The roots twitched with pleasure. Her story spilled forward, gentle and rhythmic. "There was a door," she said, "and someone opened it. A girl. Or maybe two. Maybe they weren't really girls anymore. Maybe they were promises that grew legs. She giggled at her own words. And behind the door was a room. And behind that room was another. And inside the last room, someone was always watching. Not bad. Not good. Just there. The walls of the chamber absorbed every word. Her voice etched itself into the grain of the floorboards, the cracks in the stone, the threads of root curling behind her chair. He asked me for a story, she said, glancing toward the corner. So I gave him mine. Then she looked up again. Her eyes glimmered. Do you like it? The tall man tilted his head. He did. He always did. Because the stories weren't about facts. They were about openings. And promises. And remembering. The girl leaned back in the chair. The roots curled tighter around her legs. Not binding, not holding. Just hugging. Just enough to feel like home. I think I'll stay for a while, she said. Far above, in the quiet upstairs closet, a new drawing appeared on the wall. Two girls. A rabbit. A crooked chair. And him. Always him. Upstairs, the house had grown quiet again. Not the silence of abandonment, or fear, but the kind of hush found in deep woods just before a secret is spoken aloud. Dust drifted lazily in slants of morning light. The broken grandfather clock stood motionless, as always, its pendulum long gone. The woman, Marla, stood in the kitchen, hands trembling over a chipped mug. She didn't remember falling asleep. She didn't remember dreaming. But something had shifted. Something inside her bones. Her daughter hadn't returned from her exploring, but she wasn't worried, yet. The house felt calm. At ease. Like an animal that had finally eaten. She took a sip of cold coffee. Paused. The house was listening. She felt it. A gentle pressure behind her ears. A subtle curve in the walls. The way the light bent just slightly at the corners of the room. She closed her eyes. And heard it. Her voice. A memory. Lena laughing in the orchard. Their fingers intertwined. A promise whispered into bark. And the door opening. She set the mug down, her breathing shallow. Where is she? She whispered to the floorboards. A moment passed. Then tap. From beneath the kitchen rug. Just once. A gentle knock. She moved the rug aside. The trapdoor was there. Closed. But not locked. Marla stared down at it, every hair on her arm standing on end. You're still here, she said aloud. A whisper coiled through the room, light as breath. We never left. She knelt, placed her hand on the handle, felt warmth rise through the metal, welcoming. The house wasn't hiding anymore. It wanted to be heard, and it was ready to speak. She opened the door. The trapdoor groaned as it opened, releasing a breath of warm, damp air that smelled of moss, iron, and something faintly sweet, like rotting fruit. Marla stared into the darkness below. The narrow wooden stairs waited, warped and softened with age, the same steps she'd once descended in terror. But now, there was no dread. Just a hum. Low and steady. Not from the walls. From within her. She took the first step down. The air thickened around her shoulders. Not heavy. Embracing. Like being wrapped in the weight of an old blanket you'd forgotten was yours. The wood creaked beneath her feet, not in warning, but in recognition. Welcome back. With each step, memories flickered like candlelight, Lena's giggle echoing against the stone, the smell of earth pressed against her palms, the way the roots had moved like fingers under the dirt. She reached the bottom. The cellar looked almost unchanged. But something was different. The old shelves were gone. The steel door remained, but it was open now. Beyond it, the light glowed red and warm. Flickering. Alive. Marla stepped through the threshold. And saw her. Her daughter. Seated in the blackwood chair, smiling gently, her legs wrapped in roots that pulsed faintly with light. The lantern above her swung lazily. The girl turned her head. Hi, Mom. Marla's breath caught. She rushed forward, But the roots shifted gently, not resisting, just guiding her to stop. Her daughter raised a hand. "It's okay. He's nice. He just wanted to hear my story." Marla knelt. "You're not scared?" "No," the girl smiled. "He says you used to tell good stories, too." Behind her, the chamber walls shimmered with new drawings, fresh, vivid. Marla and Lena beneath the tree. The split trunk. A door closed, then open. A woman kneeling in front of a child wrapped in roots. And the tall man, watching over them all. Not looming, not menacing, just listening. The roots shifted again. And Marla understood. She placed her hand gently on the ground beside her daughter. And began to speak. Marla's hand touched the earth beside the blackwood chair. It was warm, soft, beating faintly beneath her fingers, alive, but not threatening, like a quiet heart deep in slumber. Her daughter leaned into the chair's curved back, the roots around her pulsing softly in rhythm with the lantern overhead. A breeze, though there was no wind, moved gently through the chamber, rustling the drawings etched into the stone like paper in spring wind. The tall man was here, not seen, but felt, watching, waiting. Marla closed her eyes and began. "I was 10 when the door opened," she whispered. The roots curled softly around her wrist, not binding, but listening. "I thought it was a game. I thought if I closed it, it would go away. But the door was never meant to be shut, not like that. Not with a lie." Her voice shook. "I let my sister fall. Not pushed. Not with malice. But with a choice. I chose myself." The walls didn't groan. The air didn't chill. They simply held the words. "I forgot what I did. He let me. And I grew up around that forgetting like a scar. Until I heard the scratching again." Her daughter reached for her hand. Marla took it. Warm. Alive. A gift. She continued. "I was afraid to remember. I thought remembering would mean losing myself. But I was already lost." The light from the lantern flared slightly, casting shadows that danced, not loomed. "I didn't know stories could heal," she said. The chair creaked softly. "He told me, he showed me, stories aren't cages. They're doors. They don't trap you. They let you through, if you're brave enough to finish them." Her daughter smiled. The chamber walls brightened. Drawings shimmered. The orchard. Lena. The house. 2 girls beneath the tree, holding hands. And one word beneath them both. "Hold." The tall man stepped forward. And listened. The tall man moved like smoke through water, his limbs unfurling gently, his body bending in impossible ways without sound. He didn't speak. He never had to. His presence pressed into the chamber, into Marla's bones, into the soft pulse of the house itself. But this time, he didn't reach. He didn't hover. He knelt. Just slightly. A bow. To listen. The roots shimmered in response. They curled upward like vines greeting sun. Around the blackwood chair. Around the walls. Around Marla's feet. Around the lantern, which now burned with golden red light. Not fire, not oil, but something older. A flame made of memory. The drawings on the walls began to change again. Not vanish. Just shift. The carved figures of screaming faces softened, open mouths closed, eyes blinked gently. Some smiled. The trees in the sketches grew straighter. The house brighter. The hollow in the split tree? Empty now. No longer waiting. Marla's daughter whispered. "He says the story's almost done." Marla nodded slowly. "Not the end. Just the pause." The tall man tilted his head. A gesture of understanding. And then, finally, he moved. Not toward them, but into the wall. He stepped through the drawings, his body folding seamlessly into the lines and charcoal curves until he was no longer shadow, but ink. A sketch. Etched across the walls in a pose not of menace, but of rest. And as he vanished, the light from the lantern dimmed, but didn't die. It held. Warm. Soft. Still. The roots released Marla's hand. Her daughter stood, the blackwood chair slowly unraveling into petals of bark that drifted toward the floor like fallen leaves. The chamber sighed. Not in exhaustion. In peace. Marla stood beside her. They turned to the tunnel. And the house let them go. Marla and her daughter stepped back through the tunnel, hand in hand, their feet brushing soft moss and fading chalk lines. The corridor was no longer crooked. It had straightened, gently sloping upward now, the red glow behind them dimming to gold, then to gray. The air cooled. Not the cold of fear. The cold of departure. Of quiet after music. The hidden panel opened before they reached it. The house already knew. They stepped through into the closet, where dust no longer drifted in thick clouds. It had settled. Gently. Like snow after a long night. Marla blinked against the returning daylight. The walls didn't breathe anymore. They rested. The door to the hallway was open. The kitchen smelled like coffee again, cool and bitter. A mug sat where she had left it, rim-stained, half full. She and her daughter stood in silence for a long moment. Then the girl spoke. "Will it be lonely again?" Marla thought. "No," she said. "Just waiting. Like it always has." The girl nodded. They stepped outside into the morning. The fog was gone. Birdsong returned. And the air tasted clean. Behind them, the house stood quiet. Still slouched. Still peeling. Still scarred. But something deep within it was whole now. The door remained open. But it did not call. No scratching. No whispers. No pull. Just the faint hum of roots settling deeper, of wood sighing into sleep, and stories curling into themselves like paper under warm hands. A breeze rolled through the tall grass. Marla turned once more, eyes searching the upstairs window. She saw nothing. No figures. No movement. But in the dust on the glass pane, a single word had been traced from the inside. "Thank you?" Marla didn't cry. She thought she might. But the ache that had lived in her ribs for decades, the hollow weight of guilt and forgetting, had lifted. Not erased. Not absolved. Understood. The house stood behind them like an old friend who no longer asked anything. She looked down at her daughter, who was watching the grass sway as if waiting for it to spell out something in the wind. "Do you want to stay one more night?" Marla asked gently. The girl shook her head. "I think we're done here," she said. Marla nodded. They climbed into the car. The engine started without protest. The road ahead looked narrow, tree-lined, and familiar. As they pulled away, the rearview mirror caught one last image. The porch. The door. And the faint silhouette of a girl standing just inside. Lena. Or what was left of her. No longer bound. No longer hidden. Just watching. And waving. Marla raised her hand silently. The girl was gone. The house disappeared behind a curve in the road. But the key still lay in Marla's coat pocket. Cold again. Heavy. No longer glowing. It didn't hum now. It waited. Marla didn't toss it away. Didn't bury it. She let it rest. Because keys don't just unlock. They remind. And somewhere, another house would remember. Weeks passed. Seasons changed. The house sat untouched, buried in quiet. Grass grew taller. Ivy crept up the siding. Birds nested in the eaves. A single shutter banged softly in the wind, its rhythm slow and patient. Beneath the house, the roots pulsed. Not hungrily. Not searching. Just rooting. Settling deeper into the earth. Becoming part of it. Inside, the drawings remained. On the closet wall, in the hidden hallway, across the chamber's curved stone. Some had faded. Others had shifted. But none had vanished. The house does not forget. It does not sleep. It waits. For footsteps. For voices. For whispers in the walls. And once, in the quietest hours of dawn, The wind blew through the upper floor and disturbed a patch of dust in the far bedroom. There, beneath the cracked window, a new sprout had emerged through the floorboards. Tiny, delicate, green, a single shoot reaching toward the light. From beneath it, something glinted. Metal, jagged. The second key. The one no one buried. No one dropped. It had grown there. The house had given it back. Because it knew someone else would need it. Eventually, the mailbox rattled in the wind. Its flag had rusted in place, but today, a red envelope sat inside. No address. Just a name, written in sharp block letters. To whom the house calls. On the road, a truck pulled up. The kind with a bed full of furniture wrapped in moving blankets, and bumper stickers that had long ago lost their color. A man stepped out. Late 30s. Tired eyes. A notebook tucked under his arm. He stretched. Looked up at the house. Then smiled. "Didn't think I'd find you again," he said softly. No one answered. But the wind shifted. The door, still ajar, creaked slightly wider. The man walked up the path. Weeds brushed his jeans. A bird watched him from the porch railing. He paused beneath the eaves, ran his hand along the frame. "I used to draw you," he whispered to the house. He opened the notebook. Inside were sketches. Rough, but precise. A familiar shape. Sloped roof. Narrow windows. A tree split down the middle. Scribbled notes in the margins. Dreamed again. Same staircase. Knocking 3 beats. He looked up. "Do you remember me?" A soft creak came from upstairs. He smiled wider. "I thought so." He crossed the threshold. The house settled around him. Not aggressively. Not yet. Just acknowledging. Recognizing the scent of another story. Someone who had listened once. Someone ready to hear again. In the far room, dust peeled gently off the closet wall, revealing a child's drawing. Not fresh. Not old. 2 people, holding hands beneath a crooked tree. And behind them, him. The tall man. His arms stretched wide. Not to trap, but to gather. The house closed the door behind its new guest. The floor whispered, and deep below, the roots stirred softly. A new voice had arrived. The man moved through the house with quiet familiarity. Each footstep was gentle, deliberate, as if afraid to wake something. He brushed his fingers along the wallpaper's torn edge, the banister's worn groove, the scorched edge of the hearth. Every mark, every crack, was remembered. He opened his notebook again. A fresh page. He wrote, "House unchanged. Feels older. Feels softer. Light beneath the floor. Same glow as before." Then a pause. Scratching hasn't started. Yet. He made his way down the hall, past the silent grandfather clock, past the crooked frame. It no longer held a photograph. Just a black square. As if even memory had finally turned away. The closet door was shut. He stood in front of it. Waited. Behind the door, silence. He reached for the knob. A whisper, not from the closet, but from the walls, drifted around him like a falling leaf. "Do you know your story?" He didn't answer aloud. He opened the closet. Dust curled outward, soft as breath. The light bulb swung slowly from its cord, though the air was still. And on the far wall, a drawing. Not one of his. A child's. A girl. A woman. A rabbit. And the tall man, standing over them with a single word etched above. "Whole." The man swallowed. Flipped back a few pages in his notebook. There. The same image. Drawn years ago. From a dream. He stepped forward. The hidden panel opened before he touched it. The house knew. It always had. He ducked inside. And the walls exhaled. The tunnel breathed. Every inch of it pulsed faintly with warmth, like a long-forgotten artery beneath the earth. The man moved slowly, notebook tucked under one arm, his free hand trailing the wall, feeling not for guidance, but familiarity. His fingers brushed a groove. He paused. A carving. Fresh. I promise. He exhaled through his nose. I remember now, he whispered. He reached the end of the corridor. The chamber opened before him, low-ceilinged, round, and glowing softly from the lantern overhead. The blackwood chair had returned. Slightly different this time. Taller. Straighter. Made for him. He stepped inside. The roots stirred. Not grasping. Not beckoning. Just aware. He sat. No restraint. No pressure. Just a settling. The wood sighed under his weight. The lantern swayed. The air warmed. The voice returned, not as whisper this time, but as thought, placed gently in his mind. You've been carrying them. He nodded. Opened the notebook. Its pages flipped without touch. Images danced across the paper. Drawings he'd sketched in dreams, margins filled with words he didn't remember writing. Children. Doors. A girl in a tree. And the tall man, always in the corner. Watching. Listening. Holding memory like a candle cupped in two hands. The man whispered, "Is this what I am? A witness?" The roots pressed gently against his ankles. And he understood. He wasn't the next story. He was the one who kept them. The scribe. The archivist. The wall upon which they could etch themselves. And so he leaned forward, took out his pen, and began to write. The pen moved without pause. Not hurried. Not frantic. Just steady. Page after page filled beneath the man's hand, lines in tight, neat script, interrupted only by sketches in the margins. Faces. Trees. Keys. Doors that opened inward. The roots around his feet pulsed with each completed line, sinking with his breath. He wasn't writing the story. He was remembering it, as though the words had always been in him. Waiting. Above, somewhere distant and muffled, the floorboards creaked softly. A sound of someone walking away. Or towards something. He didn't look up. His eyes stayed on the paper. He wrote of the house as a mouth. Of the girls it swallowed. Of the lies it loved, and the truths it rewarded. Of the man who watched but never spoke. Of the roots that listened. Of how remembering could rot, but also heal. His hand ached. His fingers cramped. Still, he wrote. As if he stopped, the walls would forget again. And then, the final page. Blank. Only a single word written at the top. Ending? He stared at it. Then slowly, with ink nearly dry, wrote beneath. No. Waiting. The lantern flickered. The chair creaked. And the man closed the notebook. He stood. The roots unraveled from his ankles, brushing him goodbye. The tunnel waited. He walked back through it, each step lighter, the weight of pages left behind in the chamber. When he emerged from the closet, morning had come. The sun poured through the windows like warm water. He stepped onto the porch, blinking into the light. And behind him, the house finally closed the door. Gently, like a breath. The wind moved through the grass in slow, rhythmic waves. The man stood on the porch and looked out at the road. It stretched forward into the trees, curving out of sight. He tucked the notebook under his arm, its pages now full, no more space left. It pulsed with the weight of voices that were no longer only his. Behind him, the house stood still. Not empty, but full. Of whispers. Of breath. Of memory. It no longer needed to call. It had recorded. It had held. It had remembered. In the cellar, deep beneath the floorboards, the blackwood chair waited in silence. No roots stirred. The lantern hung still, a warm orange glow burning steady. The final drawings had dried into the stone, etched in permanence. Two girls beneath a tree. A child with a rabbit. A man with a pen. The tall man in the background. Arms wide. Eyes closed. At peace. Upstairs, in the little closet, a final sketch bloomed across the wall. This one drawn not in crayon or blood or charcoal, but something lighter. Soft. made from dream. A door. Closed. And under it 3 words. It is enough. The house exhaled. And for the first time in a very, very long while, it slept. The wind passed on. The roots went still. The story, now told, folded gently into the walls. Waiting. Not for the next victim. Not for the next scream. But for the next one to listen. Because some houses never die. They just become stories. And this one? This one was full of them. Forever.